Intolerance and anger have gripped parts of white America.
You'll be the first one to get murdered by the Muslim.
Assaults on Muslim Americans are increasing.
Your prophet is perverted.
An explosion at a Bloomington Islamic Center.
Send them back to the dustbin they come from and let them go sit on a camel.
I almost died just because I was Muslim.
We saw a number of attacks of mosques, Muslim women and men across the country completely skyrocket.
Trying to impose the Sharia.
This investigation traces the groups that promote Islamophobia, the fear of Muslims.
Women raped on the streets of Germany because of unvetted Islamic refugees.
Sharia law fully implemented, whether it's Europe or here in America, this is the goal.
We exposed the tactics used to influence social media.
Some of these numbers are staggering. Every day he's pumping this stuff out to huge audiences.
And we reveal their connections to members of the Trump administration.
I was speaking 3 or 4 times a week with Jeff Sessions, up to the election and after the election.
Do you believe Donald Trump is an Islamophobe?
Yes, I certainly do.
You need to go and leave our country.
If Muslims are attacking us, if Muslims are a threat, what do we do? The logical conclusion is violence.
No Sharia law!
Do you want biscuits or toast? No.
Living in America, everyone believes in God. Bacon. I like bacon. And God, I pray for those that are going to eat today that they would bless the food as well. In Jesus' name, amen. This is your wake-up call. Be advised, you got Muslims around here. They can bomb for their God.
Reuben Israel is a street preacher, a self-styled defender of Christianity who confronts Muslims on America's streets.
Here's an infidel right here. Here's an infidel right here. What are you going to do? We have banners and tools for every occasion. Here you have one of who Muhammad was and what their religion is about. My religion tells me that Islam is the bastard religion. Most people in America do believe Islam is bad, but don't want to say
Most
something.
People?
Yes.
According to what?
Well, we got a president that we put in office based on his on what he has to say about Islam.
You are a hate preacher. We willing to debate you all.
Your religion chops heads off. Your religion is wicked. It's starting to be awakening in America. This country is going to be taken over by Islam. How, ma'am, please, don't touch. Go to that sandbox you call home.
With thousands of online followers, Reuben's popularity reflects a growing anti-Muslim sentiment in America.
I've never thought this way in my life. I can't even believe I'm saying this. It is such a hateful ideology. They don't belong here.
A sentiment that was weaponized by Donald Trump.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
Donald Trump's rhetoric has given license and space and fuel to Islamophobia. But at the same time, it did not invent it. It did not bring it about.
Attacks on American soil by militant Islamists have raised genuine fears about the nation's security. In the past, commentators distinguished between the faith and those who act in its name, but no longer.
There is nothing in the Quran that speaks to a spiritual jihad. It is a war against non-Muslims.
Now, a multi-million-dollar industry is using American news networks to push the message that Islam itself is a threat.
The Islamophobia industry is a tight-knit group of individuals and organizations that, for lots of money, whip up fervor among the general public about the fear of Islam.
Across America, the number of organizations that are promoting an anti-Muslim sentiment has tripled in the last 3 years, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center.
What we're really talking about are conspiracy theories about Muslims. So, for example, all Muslims are terrorists, Muslims are incapable of fitting in Western societies.
It's incredibly organized, it's incredibly widespread. We're talking about groups that have hundreds of thousands of members in America. The scale of it is terrifying.
This investigation examines the organizations that make up Islamophobia Incorporated. We trace the donors who provide millions of dollars to bankroll the movement, and we ask, what do they ultimately hope to achieve?
One of the biggest groups in this industry is Act for America, run by Bridget Gabriel.
Remember, Europe is a preview of what's coming to America. Just look at cases of women raped on the streets of Germany because of unvetted Islamic refugees.
They describe themselves as a national security organization. They claim to have 750,000 members and grassroots political connections.
I think of Act for America as sort of the shock troops and the ground troops for the Islamophobic network in the United States. They are the ones who actually have people on the ground in many, many communities doing, anti-Muslim agitating.
The founder and the president of the Center for Security Policy, my friend and the one and only Frank Gaffney.
The Center for Security Policy has powerful allies in Washington.
Hey, CPAC.
It's run by Frank Gaffney, a former member of President Reagan's administration.
He is far and away the most influential and high-profile Islamophobe or anti-Muslim advocate on Capitol Hill. He's very effective with his organization. They regularly attack Muslim politicians, both Democrats and Republicans, suggesting that they are seeking to infiltrate the United States government.
Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer are banned from the UK under laws preventing hate speech. But in the United States, they run two of the most popular websites that characterize Muslims as a threat.
Islamic law asserts its authority over non-Muslims, which is why you see the persecution, oppression, and subjugation and slaughter of non-Muslims in Muslim countries.
Their purpose is really to take hold of the internet and use the internet as a space to organize people for mass protests that then eventuates in physical forms of activism.
Robert Spencer here for Jihad Watch with some important information about the shadowy and powerful organization known as the Muslim Brotherhood.
What this movement has managed to do is managed to take incredibly marginalized, obscure, conspiratorial understandings of essentially 1.6 billion Muslims, and it's managed to make them mainstream, where we all of a sudden have near a consensual negative perception of Muslims across huge swathes of the West. It's extremely dangerous.
This investigation has discovered the simple but effective tactics these groups use to instigate a fear of Islam.
Is a front for the Muslim Brotherhood.
The Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood.
There are many people like that operating and working within our government.
The Muslim Brotherhood is a religiously inspired political movement that has challenged authoritarian regimes in the Middle East. The industry's messaging presents it as a sinister cult.
The Muslim Brotherhood must understand that their work in America is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying the Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house.
If you believe the Islamophobia industry, the Muslim Brotherhood is behind pretty much every single Muslim civic political organization in the United States and possibly in the world.
Groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, groups like CARE,
the likelihood of that being the case seems rather low. The evidence of that being the case seems rather non-existent.
The Muslim Brotherhood to these people is a secret society that exists to infiltrate. It's this sinister Christianity devouring monster.
The Islamic legal code Sharia is also referred to as a threat to American justice.
Sharia, the threat to America.
Trying to impose the Sharia.
Its adherents call it Sharia.
Ascribe to Sharia law.
The use of terms like Sharia serve a number of purposes. One is that people simply don't know what they mean. But the fact that they are also foreign-sounding words means that when you project a malevolent meaning onto them that might not be accurate, people are more willing to believe it.
In 1 year, 4 of the leading anti-Muslim groups used the word Sharia on Twitter alone nearly 2,000 times.
Some of these numbers are staggering. If we look at, say, Frank Gaffney, I mean, look, he's got a total of 1,204 here in a year. And that's just the word Sharia. Every day he's pumping this stuff out to huge audiences.
Repetition of message is what these groups survive with. That's what they need, is to make sure that people identify Sharia as being an inherently malevolent force and a threat to American way of life.
No Sharia law!
Islam is a fascist ideology.
Frank Gaffney, he says Sharia is coming, he says Sharia is taking over, and he says it time after time after time.
We don't want Sharia law in our country. Sharia law!
They see it pop up on their timeline, and then they see it pop up on Pam Geller's timeline, they see it on Robert Spencer's timeline. His audience, seeing this constantly all day, perceive a threat that may be either tiny or non-existent. They see it as overwhelming and terrifying.
In 2017, Act for America persuaded thousands across 28 US cities to march in opposition to the supposed spread of Sharia.
Orthodoxy of Sharia is the enemy of our times. Sharia is a political ideology in the guise of religion.
This premise that Sharia is a threat is false. Sharia is just guidance to live an Islamic life. Sharia poses no more threat to the US Constitution than the writings in the Old Testament of the Bible.
The concern for us is when you demonize an entire population, it makes it very easy for other people to commit acts of violence against that population, right? Because they come to be viewed as a threat. And, you know, to protect yourself from threats, you need violence.
I think the link is fairly direct, honestly. Now, I'm not saying that Bridget Gabriel or Frank Gaffney has attacked a Muslim, but what I mean is they gin up this anti-Muslim hate machine, and it spurs other people who do have violent impulses.
On a warm summer's night in Minneapolis in June 2016, Abdul Rahman Hassan and his friends were playing basketball.
That night was kind of eerie. We were walking, we seen a group of people. They were looking at the way we were dressing.
One of them said, Muslims. But we dismissed it and just got into the car. And as we're driving off, we hear it again. The driver slows down, says, why would you guys say something like that? One put his head down to the window and said, I said, F Muslims, what are you guys gonna do about it?
Next thing I know, the guy's in front of the car, he's holding a gun.
Is that a gun? I was like, is that a gun? What is that? Oh my God, that's a gun.
He said, I have a license to carry and I'm gonna kill you guys.
I put the car in drive, I ducked my head.
The car just started moving, he started shooting.
I hear a bullet go past my head.
Next thing I know, I look down and there's blood flowing all over my leg.
That was a lot of blood. His leg was gushing from both sides.
As they raced to the hospital, they realized Abdullahi had also been hit.
I looked down and he's bleeding. He has a hole in his leg.
And I wiped my leg and I noticed there was a hole in my leg. Then I started freaking out.
The gunman, Anthony Sawina, was found guilty of 5 counts of attempted murder. The judge cited Islamophobia as a motive for the shooting. Sawina was sentenced to 39 years in jail.
This is injustice at its finest, and you know this. You all know this.
He is currently appealing the sentence.
Other than them being Muslim, would there be another reason why he would shoot them? No, because the reality is he identified them as Muslims, and that's what he targeted.
The bullet, it hit here and went through all the way to here. I used to have nightmares, like I'd just be sleeping and then next thing I know, like I'm shot in the dream, I wake up and it's like my whole bed is wet with sweat.
Bro, I almost died. Just because I was Muslim, just because of what I was wearing. This is crazy. I wouldn't, America?
The latest FBI statistics show that in the 2 years up to 2016, the number of anti-Muslim incidents, which often mean acts of violence, had doubled.
be the first one to get murdered by the Muslims.
right now.
Since then, many Muslims believe the numbers have increased further.
We saw after the election of the president and the presidential order of Muslim ban coming to effect, the number of attacks of mosques, the number of attacks on Muslim women and men across the country, number of people being killed who are Muslim in this country completely skyrocketed.
Minneapolis in Minnesota has become home to Somali refugees escaping war and famine. Mohammed Omar is one of them.
I came here and I found home because many Somalis were here and people in Minnesota generally nice and welcoming. I didn't feel a stranger.
He is the director of the Dar al-Farouk Mosque and Education Center. Since the election of President Trump, Mohammed has become increasingly aware of the influence of the Islamophobia industry.
People will call you and they will say some bad things. Move out from here, you don't belong here. A guy came here and he said, you guys are implementing Sharia law here, so I will bomb this place.
Around 4 a.m., worshippers were at the mosque for morning prayers. A smoking object was thrown through the window of the imam's office.
When they finished calling the prayer, a guy said, there's a smoke coming from one of the windows. And as they were running towards the front door, the bomb went off.
An explosion at a Bloomington Islamic Center caused by an improvised explosive device.
I felt like in a war zone. I felt like back home.
But the attack on the community wasn't over. Online reports of the bombing were quick to attract anti-Muslim sentiment, and they began to incorrectly link the mosque to terrorism. Articles and comments suggested that the bombing may have been faked. President Trump refused to condemn the attack, and his spokesman later explained why.
When you've had people fake hate crimes in the last 6 months with some regularity, I think it's wise, don't you, to find out what exactly is going on before you make statements when in fact they could turn out to be not who you are expecting?
The president's reaction is despicable and disgusting. What prevented him from saying, a house of worship has been bombed in my country, the country I am supposed to defend and protect, and I feel the pain of those who are suffering.
With the White House failing to denounce the attack, the hate messages continued.
Some of the comments are very scary. This guy, Derek, says, should light all these buildings on fire with chains on the exits. These vermin are a plague that needs to be eradicated. It makes me feel sad, it makes me feel upset.
Seven months after the attack, members of a white patriot movement were arrested in connection with the incident. They are currently awaiting trial. A direct link between rhetoric and violence is hard to prove, but there has been a rise in anti-Muslim incidents since 2009, the year the Islamophobia industry emerged as a popular movement.
Go somewhere else!
The beginnings of the latest outburst of anti-Muslim activity in the U.S. started around the time of what they call the Ground Zero Mosque controversy, 2009, when opportunistic Republicans got involved with claiming these horrible Muslims are putting a mosque on sacred ground near Ground Zero.
My fellow Americans.
They started to whip up these feelings and these fears about Muslims in an aggressive way.
The opposition is spearheaded by a group known as Stop the Islamization of America.
I have no problem with 1.5 billion Muslims that have no problem with me. But Islamic supremacism, I have a problem with.
Suddenly they were on CNN, they were on Fox News. They were the other side in a network news's attempt to create a balanced argument. It didn't matter that their arguments were mostly comprised of lies.
Bridget Gabrielle's Act for America.
Their anti-Muslim messaging was also being heard by wealthy donors who began to bankroll these organizations.
Anti-Muslim groups have budgets that range from hundreds of thousands up to millions of dollars a year. There's probably tens of millions of dollars sloshing around, if not 100 million, every year in budgets that they operate with.
Al Jazeera's investigative unit examined the funding of 6 of the leading anti-Muslim groups. In financial documents, we discovered millions of dollars provided by anonymous donor funds. It's known as dark money, given to these groups by front organizations while the real donor remains hidden. We shared our evidence with financial experts.
One thing that really jumps out to me is the central role, it seems, of this donor-advised fund called Donors Trust and its affiliated one called Donors Capital Fund. These are groups that fund mainstream Republican organizations.
Over the last decade, we've seen hundreds of millions of dollars spent by dark money groups. It is overwhelmingly from conservative, pro-Republican groups.
When you see organizations like Donors Trust, like the Bradley Foundation, like the Scaife Foundations, giving money to members of what is fundamentally a fringe anti-Muslim movement, it means that we're seeing a shift of the mainstream Republican Party to the right.
These donations have fueled the industry's rapid expansion.
The donors are enormously important to the messaging of the Islamophobia network. With the rise of social media, the ability to buy sponsored space, sponsoring tweets, to pay for Facebook advertising.
I've actually written this new book, and yes, this is an advertisement.
There are concerns that these funds are also being used to manipulate social media and expand the reach of the industry.
We found categorical evidence that anti-Muslim messages are being both manipulated and expanded and amplified on social media. And there's a couple of ways we found people doing this. One is, first of all, by buying in followers. Individuals buy in fake accounts. And the reason they do that is the way that we use social media now is we respect people more, we trust people more that have supposedly a larger following, so they're seen as more authoritative. Perhaps more worrying though is we found over 100 cases of what you call bots, retweeting and promoting Pamela Geller's content. They are amplifying her message, so when she puts out a story, it reaches a far wider audience than it would otherwise through this manipulation tactic.
Pamela Geller has denied any knowledge of the bots that were found to be spreading her online messages.
So they can live side by side.
In part 2, we show how the anti-Muslim industry has tried to influence the training of police officers.
He's a poison salesman. You don't want a law enforcement community infected with these hateful ideas.
And how the industry is attempting to silence the political voice of American Muslims.
Fear does terrible things to democracy. Fear kills freedom.
Our flag don't run. We are pure Americans.
Al Jazeera has been investigating the growing number of organizations in America that promote anti-Muslim messaging.
It's the Muslims that are the problem.
It's become an industry in itself, Islamophobia Incorporated. In August 2017, months of far-right protesting culminated in Charlottesville, Virginia. While demonstrating against a racist rally, Heather Heyer was run down and killed. Ghazir Khan witnessed the violence.
Look at that writing on the wall.
All gave some gave all. And Heather is one of them, that she gave all.
Khan is honored as a Gold Star father. His son, a US Marine, died in combat in Iraq. At a Democratic Party election rally, Khan criticized Donald Trump's anti-Muslim rhetoric.
You have sacrificed nothing and no one.
Trump questioned why Ghazala Khan remained silent at her husband's side, implying that as a Muslim woman, she was required to be subservient.
She had nothing to say. Maybe she wasn't allowed to have anything to say.
Do I know who you are? Are you the Gold Star father?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I'm so sad.
Oh no.
My
This is the
son,
time.
my son had 4 deployments. 3 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you think those behind the Islamophobia movement have deliberately forgotten the Muslims buried at Arlington Cemetery?
Yeah, because remembering them will not serve their purpose. Hateful rhetoric serves their purpose, brings the money, brings the political support, and people get all worried and concerned, whereas there is no such threat, especially by Muslims that live in the United States.
Do you believe Donald Trump himself is an Islamophobe?
Yes, I certainly do. Absolutely.
Anyone who believes Sharia law supplants American law will not be given an immigrant visa.
The Islamophobia network has had great impact over Donald Trump and the rhetoric that he's used. It has had so much impact in so many of the policies that he's now propagated.
I think he carries within him his own set and list of hatreds. He thinks some people are better than others, and whether it has to do with pigmentation or religious belief or where you come from, no, he subscribes to that, and he proves it all the time.
How powerful is that Islamophobia lobby here in DC?
It's notable. It's influential.
Its influence shows no sign of diminishing.
If the United States is not safe, all the other issues are secondary.
Donald Trump's national security advisor, John Bolton, is a longtime supporter of Frank Gaffney and Pamela Geller.
The idea of anti-Muslim groups and individuals that would have traditionally been seen too extreme for the Republican center doesn't seem to be the case anymore. That's deeply worrying.
I went in with my eyes wide open. I knew that there were going to be attacks on my religion. We did Aho on Saturday and Kingman last week. Tomorrow we'll be in Quartzsite, Thursday in Yuma, and Friday in Nagawa.
When Deidre Aboud announced that she would run as a Democratic candidate for the Arizona Senate seat, her campaign became the focus of anti-Muslim protest. The Islamophobia industry is keen to prevent Muslims gaining elected office.
They had their white supremacist flags. They had signs. It was all anti-Muslim, that, we were wanting to take over and that we're a cult and, the usual language.
Deidre also received thousands of online messages attacking her faith. She observed a pattern.
I think the actual coming to my page, that was organic. But the talking points are not organic. They always come back with the exact same arguments. Word for word. It is definitely an orchestrated event.
Today, Deidre is in the town of Quartzsite in rural Arizona. Despite its remoteness, we still see the reach of Islamophobia incorporated.
What's all this about? We're protesting Deidre because she's a Muslim and she believes in Sharia law. Sharia law is against the Constitution.
They were concerned that Islamic law was already being enforced in the United States.
I care about when they try to supersede the law of the land, which is the Constitution.
Have you seen any evidence of that?
There's 4 towns that are currently under Muslim law, and Chicago might as well be.
This information that you're getting about Muslims and the Sharia law, where do you get that from?
You can pull it off the net. Just look up Shara law.
From his online research, Paul says the Quran has a clear message.
It says you should kill all infidels and torture them.
But it also says that, you can accept other people's religions as well.
And then it also says kill anybody of another religion.
And do you think that Deidre's here to kill people?
I don't know what they are. I mean, we've had a lot of instances of Muslims trying to kill people.
Paul thinks President Trump is dealing with the problem brought about by his predecessor.
I believe they have partially united a nation that was divided by an obvious Muslim.
Which was who?
Obama.
President Obama and I were somehow connected to Hezbollah. Being a member of Al-Qaeda, that I'm a sleeper cell, President Obama's a sleeper cell, Keith Ellison's a sleeper cell. I mean, things that are ridiculous.
I've been called a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. I've been, of course, accused of being a terrorist sympathizer. I've been accused of any number of ridiculous, absurd, outrageous things.
Those accusations have real consequences. I've received death threats over the years. Many have said, look, that's just a price I'm not willing to pay. I don't want to get into the political arena.
So my name is Deidre Abood. I'm running for U.S. Senate.
When Deidre met the residents of Quartzsite, they brought up America's largest Muslim civil rights group, the Council for American Islamic Relations, or CARE. One resident repeated the same keyword messaging that dominates web traffic.
If in fact CARE is a front for the Muslim Brotherhood, which has clearly set out their agenda for America.
Okay, so first of all, the idea that Muslims are trying to make everybody Muslim and make the government Muslim. If you look at even majority Muslim countries, they're actually secular or at least civil.
The residents later told me they feared the Muslim Brotherhood would come to Quartzsite.
Some of the things that I have read, specifically the Muslim Brotherhood, their agenda is to infiltrate, to get into politics, to get into churches, to get into schools.
But how do we get to a point where you're not suspicious of people like Deidre, or you're not worried about Sharia in America?
How do I come to that point?
How do we get to the point where we're not worried about Sharia anymore?
I expected that we would probably have people with flags and signs, but considering that it's been in the paper several times since July and we have one truck, I'm feeling like we're doing pretty good.
Their concern is not about our safety. It's not about national security. Their real agenda is the marginalization of American Muslims. They will go after, tooth and nail, American Muslims serving in the public arena.
They want to suppress the rise of an American Muslim political voice. They just don't want anyone in the Muslim community to be able to participate in the public square.
Al Jazeera has been investigating the financial records of the organizations that fund Islamophobia Incorporated. Most of the donors we examined shared a common association. Almost 80% had vocally or financially supported causes that promote the State of Israel.
I think the thing that's most distressing for me was to see quite a number of Jewish organizations and what are really quite mainstream Jewish organizations. So Jewish federations in San Francisco and Chicago, as well as foundations like the Koret Foundation. It's extremely upsetting that a Jewish organization would be funding and funneling money to these organizations that are promoting Islamophobia. And especially, I think, with most of us who are Jewish have an awareness of the past and the scapegoating that Jewish people have experienced.
There are a lot of conservative Jews involved in this movement. They see Muslims as a threat in the West Bank and Gaza as much as they see them as a threat in Detroit, right, to American politics.
Those of us who cherish Israel as our most devoted of allies are outraged at the disgraceful decision by the Obama administration.
The war against Israel is a religious war.
The Israelis just have to stand strong, and all free people should stand with them, as they're on the front lines of the same global jihad that threatens all free people.
Anti-Muslim entities are motivated by their blind support to the State of Israel and their fear that the growth and development of American Muslims will help Americans and the American administrations adjust their positions to be more fair and just towards the Palestinian people.
The norming of evil and terror and Jew hatred.
The impulse to silence and to bully and to intimidate is part of a long-range strategy to keep Muslim communities from being a strong political force in this country. It also justifies policies supporting Israel at the same time that Israel is assaulting Palestinian human rights.
A further insight into the motive of the donors is found in leaked financial records obtained by Al Jazeera. The documents from the Lynd and Harry Bradley Foundation reveal a request for funding from an anti-Muslim group. The money would be used to combat the Muslim Student Association.
It's reprehensible. They understand that students are the next generation of people who are going to be rising into leadership in this country, and they want to really limit the parameters of conversation that are possible on campus. And I think that's also where it connects to the policies around Israel, because often Muslim student associations want to talk about Palestinian rights.
It causes a fear and a chilling effect within the Muslim community to say, perhaps America isn't welcoming to us. Perhaps there are areas, including public service, where we can't go and serve because we'll be under attack. And I think that's a tragedy.
The Islamophobia industry feeds on fear. And the problem there is that fear does terrible things to democracy. Fear kills freedom.
In response to our request for comment, the Lynd and Harry Bradley Foundation said we support a diverse array of projects and organisations that are aligned with our mission to restore, strengthen and protect the principles of freedom. The remaining donor groups that responded to Al Jazeera said they were simply doing what the anonymous benefactors wanted. The organisations you listed were funded at the time through donor-directed vehicles. We administer these funds on behalf of the donors, making distributions that comply with all US legal requirements. We do not take independent policy positions, but make grants based solely on account holders' advice. Our investigation has also discovered that the influence of the Islamophobia industry extends beyond politics into law enforcement.
My next speaker is John Guandolo, counterterrorism expert.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
Former FBI officer John Guandolo addressing an anti-Muslim march hosted by Pamela Geller, one of the founders of Islamophobia Incorporated.
100% of all published Sharia law says it is obligatory to wage jihad until the entire world is under Islamic rule.
Guandolo states publicly that Muslims shouldn't have the same rights as other Americans. Despite this, Al Jazeera has discovered that he has provided counter-terrorism training to American law enforcement. We covertly recorded one of his courses in Maricopa County, Arizona. Guandolo claims to have had contact with a senior official in Trump's administration, the Attorney General.
I was speaking 3 or 4 times a week with Jeff Sessions, up to the election and after the election, before the inauguration. And I said, sir, you got to give me 3 or 4 hours. John, I know, we're good. I said, because what's going to happen is, as soon as you go into DOJ, you're going to be in a tornado. All right, well, good morning.
He explained to police officers the threat supposedly posed by Muslim students.
All your major universities here in Arizona have got Muslim student associations. Those are places where they're recruiting, they're doing dawah, meaning the call to jihad, or the call to Islam, one and the same.
That's ridiculous.
We showed our evidence to a former FBI counter-terrorism agent.
This is just a rhetoric of fear. These organizations have a right to exist. They're part of America's fabric. Have there been cases, specific cases, where extremists have infiltrated and influenced these organizations? Absolutely. But to say that all of these organizations are the enemy, which is what he's inferring here, is just ludicrous. What he's advocating is dangerous.
Guandolo compared the civil rights organization, the Council for American Islamic Relations, or CARE, to militants involved in a conflict with Israel.
CARE, as a matter of fact, legal fact, is a member of the Muslim Brotherhood, specifically the Muslim Brotherhood's Palestine Committee, which is Hamas, a designated terrorist organization. On their website, they say they give 100% to Category 7, which is jihad, which legally we call what? Terrorism, in violation of U.S. law. So your probable cause already exists to open up an investigation on CARE Arizona right now.
CARE being the most prominent American voice, and the most organized with presence nationwide, makes it prime target, a visible target for these hate groups, because they don't want to see a strong American Muslim voice.
John Guandolo's team used execution videos shot by ISIL militants to explain the concept of Sharia to police officers.
Pretty tough to watch, huh? This is barbaric. But understand, this is the ideal. Sharia law fully implemented, whether it's Saudi, whether it's Europe, or here in America. That is the Sharia, and that's what all of these groups are telling us, from the Muslim Brotherhood, CARE, they all want that too.
Sharia as a concept is how to live an ethical Islamic life. It's a living concept that's open to interpretation. His interpretation takes a very narrow, dangerous view.
While accepting that not all Muslims in America are a threat, Guandolo used a survey to suggest that a large proportion could be. The author of the survey is Frank Gaffney, a leading member of Islamophobia Incorporated.
It is a very scientific study, and what they found is that 51% of all mosques, right, advocated the use of violence in pursuit of Sharia, okay? 30% had texts that were moderately supportive of violence. So you can see, what does that mean? So 81% of U.S. mosques that they went into had texts that were either moderately supportive of violence, or 51% advocated the use of violence. Now that is a big number.
It's disturbing because it's impossible to tell the context. Like he's taken a study and a fact pattern, and he's using it to make a case that 80% of the mosques in the United States are infiltrated by extremists.
This is a very dangerous propaganda. I can't believe that police officers are listening to a hate monger and are being misled and poisoned with this dangerous information.
For the uninformed, it could give them a data point that becomes very dangerous.
I think they should invite John Guandolo to give seminars about Islam. If they bring the representative of the KKK to give information about the African American community. If they will do this, they can do the other.
But I'd ask Keith Manning to come up and...
The county attorney's office in this part of Arizona has paid $70,000 for John Guandolo's courses. They also endorsed the effectiveness of his training.
We currently have a number of cases open in the county attorney's office where this information that you're learning is very valuable in helping us make informed decisions about what to do with these defendants.
If the tactics that John Guandolo espouses were implemented, would it be an effective counterterrorism policy?
Absolutely not. It would be a failure because it would alienate the communities that you're trying to protect and inoculate this extremism against, particularly the Muslim communities, right? It sows mistrust.
We asked the county attorney's office why they've adopted Gwandolo's techniques. They said it's critical to effective policing to be aware of the role extremist ideology can play. We hired Mr. Gwandolo to help us distinguish those individuals who pose a threat from those who simply share a common racial or religious background. John Gwandolo didn't respond to our request for comment.
He is a snake oil salesman. This stuff is toxic. He's a poison salesman. You don't want a law enforcement community infected with these hateful ideas because they do have the power to deploy deadly force.
None of the anti-Muslim groups who featured in this program were willing to be interviewed, but 3 provided statements. Jihad Watch disputes that there has been a rise in anti-Muslim attacks. A large number of attacks have actually been faked by the alleged victims. The Southern Poverty Law Center are not a trustworthy source for identifying real hate. Our organization advocates for a safer America. I don't accept that there has been a rise in anti-Muslim violence recently.
Muhammad's a false prophet. You're going to hell, Muslim.
The only member of the anti-Muslim movement who was happy to talk with us was Reuben Israel.
You are wicked. Your religion is wicked. Look at me. Look at my face.
I don't know English.
Look at my face. You need to leave our country. You need to go and leave our country.
Reuben thinks the next step is to place Muslim Americans in designated areas.
For the safety of our country right now, let's do it. Remember, we put Japanese people in a camp. We were at war with Japan.
And you think we're at the same stage?
War's a little bit different because at least Japan had the, how can I say it, testicles to put on a uniform and fight us in battle.
We have to fight back, and we have to fight back better. The real problem we're going to face now is how do we put the genie back in the bottle? Now we're talking about a societal prejudice. We're talking about a pervasiveness that is much, much harder to tackle.
The worst case scenario for this movement is that there is a continued and heightened persecution of Muslims, and that Muslims are the canary in the coal mine for a white nationalist movement that's moving across the United States.
Donald Trump, president, buddy! Oh, Donald Trump! Oh, doing a great job!
I think many of these groups are operating from a place of fear. Other groups are trying to make America great again, which for them means take America back to some mythological good old days that never existed. This sentiment that we have to go back to a Christian society and back to a society that was all white, I think is not only erroneous, but it's misplaced.
They believe there is a fundamental incompatibility between Muslims and the West. The real question we need to ask these people is, how do they want to solve that? The only real tangible outcome of that is the removal of Muslims, getting rid of Muslims out of the West. And we've seen in history what that means.
Go back home!